Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream. I want to thank my sponsor Fritz Aquatics for supporting this channel and the education that we give out week after week. Also, I would like to remind you that Coral Magazine is the magazine you should subscribe to. And, I give the speech. So, if you are a subscriber, what I would like you to do this week is get one of your friends to subscribe as well. Let's do a grassroots campaign and get more people to read the magazine. Because the amount of hours I pour into making sure everything is perfect, I need more people reading it. So there is a subscription link there at the bottom that saves you a couple of dollars off the subscription rate. It's normally $39 for a year, which is 6 issues. It comes out every 2 months. So tell your friends. Do it. Seriously. Today. I also offer consultation services. If you need any help with your aquarium, please let me know. We can do a video chat one-on-one for about an hour, maybe longer if needed. And I charge a fixed rate. It's $125 for my time, and I would be welcome to taking on a few new people this week. Rogers Food is a sponsor of this channel. It's a type of frozen food that does not blow around in the tank, and it stays in one fixed spot for all your fish to chew on it. So they just eat on it, and eat on it, and it gives them time to work it over versus it blowing around and landing in the rockwork. It's me! And you might see something new on the screen next to me. I guess it's official because I got my trophy. It's right here. It's right here. I mean, you already see the picture, but this is it. Proof it's real. I got the Mazna Aquarist of the Year award for 2024. It has my name spelled correctly, which I love. And this is something I've kind of wanted forever. And to actually get it is pretty awesome. So I am ecstatic. And it's going to stay in here where we do our streams because it's a nice safe spot. And I like it right in that area right there. So it's going to be right there to the side. Let me see if I can adjust this camera slightly. There's a thing in the way. Like this. Nope, the other way. The other way. A little bit more. Let's see if that worked. You can kind of see it there in the background, sort of. So let's see. I see all kinds of people are already commenting. I want to welcome you guys. Hi, Thomas. Hey, Surf Zone Aquatics. Hello, Michael Nunley. Larry's here. Hi, Afonso. Pop Reef. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing Coral Magazine, the subscription link. Also, Andrea just had, God, I always call her Christine. She just had a birthday yesterday, so everyone tell her happy birthday because she needs to know it. Eric's Fishing is here. He says, any tips on getting rid of Bryopsis infestation? Absolutely, you have come to the right channel. And this is what we're doing today. We are talking about your questions. So there's no official topic for this stream. Partially because I've been inundated working on the next issue of Coral, and my brain is on all that, and I have to really resist the urge to share what you're going to see in the magazine. If I sit there and go into this story about crown of thorn starfish, then when it comes to that page, you're like, oh yeah, Mark talked about this, and you'll flip past it. And I don't want you to do that. By the way, really interesting story. So there's a heads up. If you already have a magazine subscription, you should have received the themed aquariums from Coral. I still am seeing a weird color change. That is not the color of the magazine. That is so funny that it does that. It's a green coral, but on camera, it looks brown. It just sucks all the color out. And I don't know why. The room is the right color. I'm the right color. There's no filter on that lens. So anyway, let me talk about Bryopsis. And you guys just keep putting questions in the chat, and I will address them as I come to them, okay? So Bryopsis is a type of coarse algae. Looks like hair algae somewhat, but it's more rigid. It still can move and wiggle, but it really is more coarse. It kind of is more like, it's in the turf family, where green hair algae is in the filamentaceous type of algae that moves like hair does in the water, hair algae. And so Bryopsis is more rigid in that regard. It's a little bit more, like I said, it prickly, it's rigid, you can mush it down with your finger and you'll feel the resistance. So if you're wondering what that is, that's what it is. And it's a really bad one to get in your tank, but it's not impossible to get rid of. So the first thing I would do is I would get either a turkey baster or a power head, and I would blow off as much as you can of the bryopsis, the trapped detritus in the bryopsis, because the detritus sits in the core of the plant, and the plant is using it for fuel, like its own little mini DSB, deep sand bed, and it's sucking the nutrients out to keep growing. And then when you reach in and trying to rip some off, you usually can get the top pieces off, but the coarse part is really attached to the rock and hard to remove. You can't quite get down to the rock and remove it entirely. Certain algae you can pluck them. This one here, you're going to leave behind a significant amount of it's more than residue, and it's just going to keep growing back and back and back, and you're going to keep mowing it down, and you're going to be kind of frustrated, and which is why it's a good question. So first step, like I said, blow it off really, really good to get rid of that stuff. You can remove the excess by ripping off the surface part, and then you really need something that will consume it. And the one thing that absolutely will eat it is a lettuce nudibranch. So if you have a small infestation, you probably need one or two. If you have a larger one, you're probably going to need more. The thing about the lettuce nudibranch is it is a very fluffy, light, feather-like animal, and it will just be found somewhere in your tank where you don't expect it, like against the side of a power head. Or it may drift on into the refugium zone, and you have to go get it out of there and put it back on the bryopsis. But do that. Just keep putting it back where it belongs, and keep finding it each day. I used them years ago myself, and they definitely consumed it. It was a wonderful little nudibranch. They're very pretty. They're gorgeous, actually. And so that is one method. If your tank has a much worse infestation and you don't want to be hunting and putting back your feather-light nudibranch, and when I say feather-light, that darn thing, you peel it off the pump gently, and then you're trying to place it, and it's like trying to place a feather on the, and it does. It'll get on it. It will crawl right onto it, but there's no, like, girth to this animal. It's just like, it's like fluff. It's like holding cotton candy in water. So it just, and you just kind of carefully guide it back to its spot. But if you need something that's a little bit more voracious and proactive, I learned the hard way because I had gotten some rock from someone else years ago. They asked me, hey, can you put some of my corals in your tank? I'll give you some rock. So he did. And then this bryopsis started growing in my tank. And I said, hey, what is this green stuff? And why is it such a pain to get rid of? And he said, oh, you don't have a fox face? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, I do. And I'm like, how's that going to help me? I don't want a fox face. But if you like the fox face and you want to put one of those in your tank, it will completely eat the bryopsis. It will eat it till it doesn't exist. I mean, like I said, I received this rock that looked nice and clean and covered in coralline, put it in my tank, and then the bryopsis appeared once the predatory fish was gone. Because it was in the home tank of the hobbyist that had lent me the rock and the corals. So that is another one that you can use. Years ago, there was a product called Kent Tech M, which no longer is that product. But if you use that product specifically, and I just feel like there's got to be something else on the market, maybe something from Brightwell, something from Continuum, because both those companies know what was in that bottle. And so there may be something they have, I don't know, maybe it's called Bryopsis Away or Bryopsis Killer, or I don't know what they call it. But if you could get a product from Brightwell or or Continuum, and you can, I mean, the goal was to bring your magnesium, but what you were doing is you were dosing this product. But when you got your magnesium level up to 1600 with Kent Tech M, which is a very specific thing, not just any old magnesium, it had to be that exact product. That's what I'm saying. You're going to have to go to Brightwell now and say, what do you have that's like that one? Or, Continuum, who's actually owned by Jack Kent, as far as I know, last I heard. And Jack is the one that invented this stuff. He never told us what's in Kent Tech M when he owned Kent. But now he owns Continuum, so he may have a magic bottle of the stuff, and you can add it to your tank, raise the level of your magnesium in the tank at the same time, and the bryopsis will go away. Now, I said 1600 because that was the number that worked 15, 18 years ago. 1600 is really, really high, and the higher you go with magnesium, the more of a detrimental effect you will have on the cleanup crew in your aquarium. So we're not raising magnesium to 1600 to get rid of bryopsis. We're using that product. We thought it was the 1600, but it had to be something else in the bottle that we didn't know what it was, and no one would unseal their lips. It was a big secret. So if you can get your hands on whatever that magic elixir is this day and follow those directions, it should help to remove it. Another product you might try is going to be Flux RX. That has been out now for probably almost 10 years, and Flux RX works for hair allergy if you use it at single strength. If you use it at double strength, it works for bryopsis. And if you use a triple strength, it works for Valonia, bubble algae. So that is another choice of product that you could possibly utilize in your battle against bryopsis. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that. There's Mina. Oh, nice. Thomas says that at his uncle's fish store that they may... oops, there it is. Let me move this where it belongs. That they may be carrying Roger's food in their store. Okay. Paul's here. He made a live stream. I make one every week. I know what you mean. Carol says, can you give me all the details of what you used in the tank to get rid of dinos using pods? Caitlin wasn't my daughter. She was my girlfriend. So the pods I used were the Apopods, the Apex pods from Reef Nutrition. And it got rid of them completely, but now my tank is still kind of dealing with something that's not pleasant. I haven't figured it out what is going on with that tank. It just seems to be going through phase after phase. It's been running now for 2.5 years, basically, but it did eradicate them. So, okay, the other things I did in that tank was I went ahead and I used UV every single night for 12 hours. I was running some fresh carbon in the little filter basket in the filter that hangs in the back from Siche. And I was dosing phytoplankton for the pods, and I did no water changes. And I made sure I had good flow in the tank too. Make sure that the power head that's in there, which in that case is a Nero 5, the back of the strainer that protects it from fish getting sucked in, the fish guard, was getting clogged up with all kinds of nuisance algae that were coming off the rock and attracted to the back of the pump, and they would slow the flow. So I had to make sure the flow maintained in the tank. But those were basically my approaches, and the only thing I did everything except put the pods in, and then finally I put in the pods. And that went in there, and they started devouring it, and it took about 3 weeks or so for it to go away. But then, a couple weeks later, something new is in there that's different, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I thought we were done with this mess. I just want to enjoy my tank. Thank you, Santana Reef. I really appreciate that. He says, huge congratulations to you, Mark. You deserve this and so much more. Fairly Odd says, where are you at with your contemplating a sulfur reactor for your tank? It's on the hit list. It's something that I should do, but I've got at least 4 different things I need to do first, minimum, for the aquariums. And they have been sitting on standby, and I just cannot incorporate another thing on my list. It's just a mental thing that I will probably be doing here soonish. Well, let's be realistic, 6 months. But in the meantime, I have other things I must do first, and there's only so many hours in the day. Andrea today was telling me in a private chat, I don't know how you do it all. And I was like, it ain't easy, and I am always busy. It's a lot. So I've got some things I'm doing today to get them off my list. I'm going to be happy about that. And getting that done will be really important. But I've got some major stuff that has to be accomplished first before I start taking on extra new things. Larry says, can we discuss the benefits of calcium reactors? And can a large reactor be a good thing? That's a great topic. And yes, we absolutely can. So I've been using a calcium reactor myself since 2004, so that's 20 years. I'm actually using the same calcium reactor for 20 years too. On the body of the device, there's a pump on the side, and there is a full article on my website, which maybe Andrea can get for us and stick in the chat. So the reactor is a acrylic chamber filled with media. The media I use is Reborn from Two Little Fishies. It's an aragonite-based media. It's coral, basically coral skeleton. And then there's a pump on the base that keeps the water doing this in the reactor all the time. Its job is to recirculate and nothing more. It's not putting water in it. It's not taking water out. It is keeping the water spinning, okay? Like a closed loop. Then I drip in or bubble in, really, it's really bubble in. I bubble in CO2 into the reactor to make the pH inside the reactor lower than the reef tank. And what that does is it makes the media, the reborn, dissolve. And as it melts and slowly just evaporates, so to speak, I get alkalinity and calcium benefits in my reef tank. Now, how does the water get out of the reactor? I use another pump to push water into the reactor, which makes water come out of the reactor. That's the whole process. Everything else I describe at this point that may sound even more complex are just what make it easier to operate. But the general theory is you just need a recirculating reactor with a way to push water in and have water trickle out the other side, and you need CO2 to lower the pH in the reactor. Now, I use a pH controller. The pH controller keeps the water around 6.7. There's some medias that need to be down as low as 6.2 to get the proper effect. But no matter what you're using for pH, what matter, I mean, so like I'm using 6.7, but the media that I buy from Two Little Fishies may say operate at 6.2. But all I care about is what is the alkalinity of the effluent, the liquid coming out of the reactor, measuring. And that number should be somewhere between 19 and 35 DKH. So if you were to set up a calcium reactor and you didn't lower the pH properly in there, and let's say the pH in the reactor was 7.8, 8.1, something almost the same as your aquarium, you'll get no alkalinity benefit. And if you were to measure it, it's probably coming out at like 11 or 12, which is not nearly enough to increase and keep up with the alkalinity in your aquarium. You need that much higher number. So if you are running one, you should grab some of the effluent, the liquid coming out of the reactor, stick it in a Salifert test kit or something, and get a measurement and find out where it's at. And you're gonna need a lot of the drips from the bottle. And 19 to 35 DKH is the goal. Mine tends to be somewhere around 31, 32. And then the CO2, you're thinking, well, where does that come from? I'm not talking about the stuff in the air of the room that we're breathing out of our mouths or from our pets. I'm talking about a tank, like a steel bottle or aluminum or whatever they're made of, that is filled with CO2 gas. And then on the top of that tank, there's a thing called a regulator. It is screwed on. It usually has 2 gauges. One gauge tells you how much gas is in the tank, which it tends to not move at all. It'll be, when you buy it and you hook up the regulator and you open the valve on the top to let the gas come out, the first gauge will probably read around 1200 psi. And then gradually it may work its way down to somewhere around 1,000. But then one day suddenly it's 300. I mean, it stays full for a long time on the gauge, and then suddenly somewhere near the end of its lifespan, shoop, that needle just drops. You're like, oh, I need to get gas today, and you run out immediately to get more. The second gauge on the regulator is going to be the one that's how much pressure you're going to push into that reactor. So if you were to put a lot of gas pressure through the tubing into the reactor, you could literally blow the reactor apart. It would just burst the seams, crack the glue joints. Fittings could pop, all kinds of stuff. So we don't do that. You want to be at 6 psi, which is really low compared to a typical home in America. Usually homes have a minimum PSI of 40. Some people have 70, 80 PSI coming out of their pipes. Some people do have lower PSI, their water pressure is really low and they struggle. The water is barely coming out of the faucets, the toilets take forever to fill up, it's just a thing. And that's a thing between you and the city. But ideally, most homes have 40 PSI, but we're saying in a calcium reactor, the CO2 going into that reactor, which is just plastic, acrylic and glue, you want to go in at 6 psi. And as you're pushing that in and the water is pumping into the reactor, the tube on the other side where the water's coming out is unobstructed. I don't use a pinch clamp or anything on that to control how much comes out. I control what goes in. And so if I have it going in, and I'm using a dosing pump now. I used to use, a long time ago, it came with a MaxiJet. And you just had a MaxiJet pump, you stuck it in the sump, and you just turned it on, and the tube would push water into the reactor as fast as it would come through that 1/4-inch tube. And then on the output, you put what's called a pinch valve to control it down to a drip. But I didn't like that system, and it never worked for me. So within a pretty good amount of time, I would say within the first 6 months, I made some changes. And within a year, for sure, I had switched from the MaxiJet to a manifold pump. So you've got one big pump in the system, and it goes into plumbing that has multiple valves, and one valve is for carbon, one valve was for biopellets, one valve was for the calcium reactor. And I used this little tiny valve that was called a needle valve instead of a pinch valve, and I would adjust it just like a miniature-sized version of a gate valve. And I would use that needle valve to dial in exactly how much gas I wanted to go into my reactor to control the bubble rate, and basically I was looking for somewhere around 1 bubble per second going into the calcium reactor. Nowadays I use it a little faster. It's probably 0.6 of a second or something like that. And so it's putting in a bubble, a bubble, a bubble, a bubble, a bubble, a bubble, constantly, 24 hours a day, that's going into the reactor. And then the circulation pump is keeping it all stirred up. And if you ever have a calcium reactor and you've got everything hooked up, but you forget to turn on that circulation pump, you will not get the melting effect you need. You won't get the pH level you're expecting. And you'll be super confused because you're thinking, everything's full. Why is it not working? And then you're like, oh yeah, I got to plug it in. So plug it in and let it all circulate, and the pH will drop in there, the media will melt, and then the output will go into the reef and give you that constant alkalinity level. If your alkalinity in the tank is going too high, you've got a couple of choices. You could slow down how quickly the water's pushing into the reactor. So basically, let's just use numbers. If we were putting in water at, I'm going to use milliliters, it's going to be the best way to do this. If you're putting in water at 60 milliliters per minute, and your alkalinity was just going higher and higher and higher, then I would say try it at 50 milliliters per minute. If your alkalinity is dropping, even though you've got the effluent coming out and everything's working correctly, and it's measuring the right strength, like I mentioned earlier, then you might need to go to 80 milliliters per minute. So what does that turn into in real numbers for us Americans? My 60 milliliters a minute, when you calculate it all out per how many minutes are in an hour, how many hours in a day, and you do all the math, and then you convert those milliliters into US gallons, I think I put in somewhere around 16 and a half gallons of alkalinity into my tank daily, which sounds like a lot, even though it seems like so little. But like I said, back in the day, lots of hobbyists were doing it with 1 drip per second. That's it. Drip, drip, drip. I'm like, how is that enough? That doesn't work for me. I actually have a slow trickle, not a stream, but a trickle coming out of my reactor constantly. And when that trickle slows down to a crawl, I have to make an adjustment and correct something or replace the tubing to get my flow rate back where it needs to be, so that way my alkalinity stays stable all the time in the reef tank. Okay? Now, you did ask about can a larger reactor be a good thing? I would say that you need one that matches the aquarium. If it's like super large, you may not reap the benefits you're looking for, and you may deal with a pH depression for the total ecosystem of the tank. It may be that because the reactor's so big that there's this CO2 off-gassing that's happening that's lowering the pH to your reef tank. So I would say to keep it somewhere reasonable within limits of what your tank size is and not oversize. Now, that being said, I remember a guy who had a calcium reactor, and it was a nice one. It was made for a big tank. And man, I haven't talked to this guy in forever. His nickname was Lunch Bucket. And he had this calcium reactor that was external. Didn't even have, the tank was small, the sump was small. He couldn't even put it in the sump, which is my preference. I love to have all my reactors in the water if at all possible. But he had it outside of the stand next to the aquarium, and it was pretty darn big. And it looked like this mad science experiment, which is kind of cool. I really like calcium reactors for that effect. They just make people say, whoa, that's intense. I'm like, yes, it is. yes, it is. But it's amazing. And so Lunch Bucket had this big reactor on the side of what was a 40-gallon breeder, which was insane. And where I was like, what are you doing? I mean, you don't even need one on a tank less than 100 gallons. 90 gallons, 75 gallons, 55 gallons, 40, 20s. No, you can just dose. That's so much easier and takes up way less space. But bigger tanks definitely benefit from the calcium reactor. Now, the effluent coming out of the tubing, like I mentioned, I keep that at a trickle. Just in comparison, my friend Dwayne in Seattle, he does the same thing. His is always at a stream. And So that's just giving you some, there's more than one person doing it that way. And the article on my website really delves into this, into every bit of it. So feel free to read that over. And I think that'll help you kind of get squared away. Copper Canyon Terrapins says, how do you get rid of marine velvet in a tank after a breakout? I've lost a yellow tang, 2 clownfish, I think, percent. And a royal gromma in the last week. I only have 2 chromas left in the tank. Well, first of all, when velvet gets in the tank, you really have to remove all the fish and put them in a hospital tank immediately, hoping to treat them successfully before they're gone. At this point, I would say get the chromas out of your tank and into a hospital tank and treat them if you can with whatever it is that needs to be used for velvet, which I don't know the answer because I'm not a fish disease guy, but I can point you to a guy named Humble Fish. So you go to your computer browser and you type in Humble, and then you put a period, and then you write the word fish, and then you hit enter. That's the website. It's not humblefish.com. It's humble.fish, and then hit enter. Go there, and you can, I'm sure he's got 1 or 2 FAQs that will go right into what you need to do to treat for velvet. He'll give you advice. He may even have advice for what to do with the tank itself. But normally, when you have fish disease in the tank, you get all the fish out, you leave the tank fallow for a specific period of time, and then after that time has elapsed, any possibilities of the fish disease has died off because there's no fish. And then you can put in new clean fish in your tank and kind of start anew. I'm really sorry you lost your fish. Velvet is one of the probably worser diseases to get because it acts so quickly and takes out so many fish so rapidly. So that's go to him. Oh, I've got a funny story. I'm going to share a funny story with you guys. Santana says, are we really breaking out the Crown Royal today? Because I got an award. Andrea had a birthday. So one of my customers, who's also a Texan, said, hey, Mark, what's your address? You got this award, and I want to go ahead and send you a small gift. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. Thank you. Okay, here's my address. So then, a few days later, she says, here's the tracking number. And then the box arrived, and, I cut it open. I was like, what could it be? And there was a big jar filled with candy corn, which is my favorite this time of year. I love that stuff. And then also there was a really nice Yeti drinking cup, to keep beverages cold. And there was a cutting board with a knife, with, for like cheese and crackers and stuff. I was like, oh, that's really nice. So then I thanked her and I sent an email. And she wrote me back and she said, so there's actually a story behind that. She said, I went to the liquor store. I don't buy alcohol normally. So I went to the liquor store to find, a bottle of Crown Royal for you. And then, she said that was an adventure in itself. She had not seen... I'm just going to say it because it made me laugh. She said, I've never seen the type of people that go to buy liquor during the daytime. I was like, what does that even mean? What did she actually see? Apparently they were scary looking people buying liquor. I don't know. I've been in lots of liquor stores in my life and everyone seemed relatively normal. Of course, there's always one guy that drinks too much and you can totally tell, but usually it's just people, like buying fabric or buying groceries. They're just buying booze. I mean, okay, but whatever. So anyway, she said that was funny and it was an adventure. Then apparently she tried to mail me this bottle of Crown Royal because she's in Texas and Texas is enormous and they wouldn't let her. and I wrote back. I said, that's crazy. The post office knows I love Crown Royal. Why wouldn't they help you? But obviously you can't do anything illegal. So she sent me these other gifts to make up for the lack of Crown that she couldn't send me. Which means I need to go down and visit one day and have, a meal with her and her husband and get some of that Crown. Chad says, my pH stays 7.8 to 8.0 throughout the day. Should I raise it, and if so, how would you recommend it? I have a 50-gallon all-in-one with a protein skimmer and CO2 media. All the other numbers are great. How's the livestock would be my first question, because if the livestock is looking good, and everything's growing like it should, maybe that pH level is perfectly fine for what you're keeping. But if you are seeing stagnation of corals, if you are seeing things that just aren't normal when you look at other tanks in comparison, then yeah, possibly bringing your pH up higher would be better. So you said all the other numbers were fine or were good, but basically we're wanting to get all of your numbers within this magic square. It's a reef chemistry thing. And if you have the correct alkalinity, the correct magnesium, the correct calcium, the correct temperature, and the correct salinity, pH usually takes care of itself. Now, you can use products to bring pH up a little higher. Soda ash is one method that can be used, and it should be dosed early in the morning, like if you were dosing for alkalinity, and you would do that early in the morning when the pH is at its lowest, and that would help buffer it up, but it's only going to last for a small period. There are products on the market like pH 8.3 that tell you just put this in every single day, but that's bad advice. Don't do that, because what will happen is you're putting it in every day because you're trying to have this magic pH, but what's happening is the alkalinity is going up with it, and suddenly your tank's at 15, 16 DKH, 18, 20, 21, 25, some crazy high number because you're just trying to keep pH. I usually say you don't have to worry about pH. Now, maybe someday I'll change my mind on that, but for the most part, the number is what it is. The fact that the number is at 8.0 as a peak is still okay. It could be the all-in-one if it's a sealed type of tank with a cover where there's no fresh air, possibly getting some fresh air on it, a fan blowing across the surface, even having the water surface rippling would be better to get better gas exchange and help raise the pH in the aquarium. So opening up the door on this, the aquarium, or lifting the lid a little bit, or having a fan blow on it, or change the power head to make the surface ripple. These are all some techniques that can help to bring that pH up a little bit higher. But ultimately, the only reason we make any changes on the tank is based on what the livestock is doing. And if the livestock is doing well, then it's fine. I wouldn't even worry about it. Okay, Eric says that you can't take the rock out. It's covered in green Montipora, and it's a small 15-gallon tank. Well, it's a 15-gallon tank. I mean, that one back there is a 20, and you could technically remove the rock and drip peroxide directly on the Bryopsis over the sink. But then you need to really rinse the rock, because as soon as you put that rock back in your aquarium, the peroxide that's soaked into the rock will create a reaction, and you'll see all your snails go up the glass really fast trying to get out of the tank because they're like, what is this? There's too much of it. So that is another method that can work, but you might be having to use something, like I said, something from Continuum, or maybe trying Flux RX in that small aquarium. I cannot think of any other type of snail that will devour it. I mean, the lettuce nudibranch really is the right choice. And the tank being a 15-gallon, it's an all-in-one, right? The Innovative Marine. So that may work out as a good predatory slug. And then once the Bryopsis is gone, you need to either return the nudibranchs or find another home that needs it, because their feeding requirement is Bryopsis. And if you don't have any, then what's it going to eat? It's not like you can just lay it on a sheet of nori and hope for the best. That's not going to work out. Thomas says, how hard is it to install a UV on a 65-gallon reef tank? Not hard. There's two different kinds on the market. There's one that hangs on the back, and there's one that fits underneath. Typically in a sump compartment, where it lays horizontally, and you would then use a power head or a pump to push water from the aquarium through the UV and back into the sump. If your aquarium doesn't have a sump and it's just a glass box with hang-on-back gear, you need a hang-on-back UV system. I'm using one, I think it's called Aqua UV. It's been on Caitlin's Reef now since February, and it just runs 12 hours at night. It's kind of unsightly. I don't like looking at it. I can't wait to get rid of it, just because it's one more object that kind of spoils the look of the aquarium, but it can possibly work. The other choice would be to get an appropriate size UV for a quarantine tank and then just use it on new fish. And don't put the UV on the reef display. Use it for the new fish to make them parasite free, and then when they've gone through their quarantine period and then they look nice and healthy, then you can move them into the tank and you can just enjoy them without having to look at one on your 65 gallon. Kumar says, put a small spotlight on that, like for a turtle tank for the Masno Award. Yeah, it's pretty. Well, usually these are open. I've got it closed up. I have curtains that I shut. Otherwise, you just see the sky on my glasses the whole show. So I've got lights here, and then I've got the windows closed and the curtain. And the curtain also helps act as a nice baffle to avoid an echo in the room, which is nice. Carol says, did you use the UV during the pod time? No, I believe I unplugged it and left it off overnight or for that night. Or matter of fact, maybe I didn't even unplug it. I might just open the app and said, turn off UV. And then the next day reestablished it again. But when the pods are in the tank, you need to give them enough time to get down into the substrate and down on the rocks and maybe on the glass. But then, after a while, they're holding on to wherever they're holding. And then you can turn on the UV again. But anything that's, if any of those pods are blowing through the tank, they could end up getting sucked through the UV and, of course, killed. And then basically you're putting in pods, they're getting destroyed by UV, and it's kind of pointless. So, yeah, you definitely want to shut that off when you're adding them and give them time to get dispersed into the aquarium. Pods tend to be more active at night when the lights are out, when the fish are sleeping. So that's kind of a weird situation because you don't want to lose all your pods that you're putting in the tank, but you need to run UV at night because that is also when the dinoflagellates are free swimming. So you may just have to buy more and more pods. Mina says, how do you like the P&W Custom Smallin one? Unfortunately, not many reviews out there. Well, it's kind of a new product if I recall. I mean, maybe in the last 3 months. I love it. Matter of fact, it's super cool. Let me switch you guys over to that really quick here. This way? Yes. And then, stop that. Sorry, got to do something here first. It's going to stay on me. It wants to keep me on camera. So stay there. You can see my monitor right there. Okay, and then we'll do this. And then what I'll do here, I'm trying to get it in the middle of the camera for you. Just like, oh, God, it's so hard. All the controls are reverse of what I expect. We'll go in a little bit tighter. So I'll show you guys something here. I don't know if I should turn off the blue light or not, but I'll turn on some white light. Maybe that'll help a little bit. So this has a cover on top, which I was really surprised. There is evaporation. I did not expect that. I really thought it was going to hold its own, but I had to put in quite a bit of RODI water here a couple days ago. So in the back of the tank is a little tiny filtration chamber, and I just put in, well, I did some switching today. So you pull this thing out, and right here is my ChemiPure, and then this little sponge here and this little sponge here are both the, what is it called? Polyfilter. And so this one here was the old one that's been in the tank now for basically a month. This is a brand new one because in a week or so I'll get rid of this and then I'll take this guy that'll be a week old and I'll put it up top and I'll put a brand new one down underneath again. Polyfilter is a good way to trap stuff in your tank. I'm not talking about filter floss. I'm talking about Polyfilter, the brand. And you put that in there and it works as magic. And between it and the ChemiPure, I basically have zero water qualities with this aquarium at all. And I did order a white light for this tank because I think that'll be better for the show, but it hasn't arrived yet. I don't know where my towel went. I was going to dry off the surface. But anyway, yeah, it's a cute little tank. And it's super, dead silent. And I highly recommend it. I think it's so fun. And, all that's in there is a tiny starfish. Sorry, I'm fixing my camera. Is a tiny starfish and my my Blenny, my little Barnacle Benny. And, last night I was feeding all the tanks and I forgot this room. I just totally forgot. And so I went ahead and grabbed some Reef Nutrition food. I had some of that roe and some Fido and some Arctopods. And I went ahead and did both tanks rapidly before lights out. And the Blenny didn't come out. I was like, really? So I'm going to have to try to be better at feeding him during the daytime, a little bit sooner in the day. And, I could try other things. I know that he was eating pellet food, but he really likes mysis a lot. And so, but he also loves living in his barnacle. He likes being hidden. It's really funny. Okay. Oh, is there a con? Well, I guess, yeah. You have to limit how much livestock you put in there. You got to behave. You can't go bonkers in that thing. It's easy to fill it up with a bunch of cool stuff, but how's it going to work out long term? I'd much rather put in one or two things and allow those things just to grow and do their thing. And you also have to keep in mind how great or not great is the light itself. I have no idea. I mean, the light's working, and since there's a fish in there, it's perfect. But if I was trying to put in corals, I don't know which corals would benefit from that light. Zoanthids and mushrooms are going to be totally fine. But if you're trying something like, I want to put in Setosa, a type of Montipora species, or I want to put in Fungia, or I want to put in a clam. I mean, these are the kind of things we think of, we're like, I could put this in there because it's so cute. But you want to make sure that you're within the realistic limitations that the aquarium provides. And then, of course, if you're going to dose anything, it's 1 gallon. It's going to be really hard to dose. It's really the best filtration is going to be the stuff I showed you in the back and doing water changes from time to time. And I haven't changed water on it yet, but I probably should. And I could probably take out half a gallon and put in half a gallon and boom, be good for a solid month. That's a lot of water for that little tank. But it's zero sound. It's really, really nice. I like that. I like that both tanks are quiet. Aquaball says, my alkalinity is dropping fast. I'm checking alkalinity every day. 2 days ago, after a water change, it was 7.9. Today it's at 7.4. Would Alpha Reef stabilize my alkalinity? The tank is 10 months old. It's a mixed reef. Well, Alpha Reef should keep it there if you're using it always. If you're operating it every single day in the tank. That's the principle. Once you've got your numbers where they need to be, you use Alpha Reef, and it just keeps it going nonstop and keeps it there. But, of course, you still need to test from time to time to double-check and see if you need to replenish calcium or if you have to replenish alkalinity to kind of buffer it up to get it back where it needs to be. But what are you using to measure that? Is that the HANA alkalinity checker? And I'd like to know that before I keep going. But, alkalinity should be dosed to a tank daily. And when you don't dose it at all, hopefully you're only keeping corals in there that don't need alkalinity. Fish really aren't too stringent on alkalinity levels, but, certain soft corals don't care about it. You could have leathers and you could have gorgonians. And like I said before, mushrooms and zoanthids, they're not going to really be big needers of alkalinity. But when you start putting in LPS corals or SPS corals, alkalinity needs to be there. But even, 7.9, what is that? That's basically 8 DKH. You're basically right there. And we want to be somewhere between 8 and 11, so you're right on the low end. And there are guys out there that want to be at 6.5 or 7. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy low. I would never do that. But they do it, and they're happy. So you just want to find the delicate balance that works, but you should be dosing it, and you should be dosing it slowly into the system so that it mixes in and doesn't just precipitate out as soon as it hits the water. If you had a little shot glass of what you're putting in and you just went and just dumped it in, it would just turn to snow and it would land everywhere and it wouldn't raise the alkalinity of the tank. But if you're having it going slowly, it can dissipate in an area of high flow and it can do its job and it can keep your alkalinity up where it needs to be. And you should be dosing it early in the morning. Between 5 and 9 a.m. is when you should be putting it in the tank. Thomas, thank you for the super chat. He asked, do I need a UV for my tank or not? I'm going to say no. But, it's really easy to get more and more gear. I've seen your tank. Your tank seems like it looks okay. I don't think that you need to put on another piece of gear on it. And the only reason I put it on Caitlin's reef was only because of the dinoflagellate problem. I've never had one on my 400 gallon. I never had one on my 29 gallon. I never had one on my 55 gallon. I never had one on my 280 gallon. I don't have one on this 20 gallon. I don't have one on that 1 gallon. So I'm only using it on the one tank that actually needs it. And I've never had one on my frag system either. I didn't even buy one until the first time was this year because of the UV situation. The dinoflagellate situation, and I was told you have to use UV. And I was like, oh. So I went and bought one. And I bought it through my fish store. I like these little messages that are appearing in here from Fish Fam Link. They're so nice. I'm sticking them on the screen because they're making me smile. Join as a member for exclusive benefits and support the channel. Consider sending a super chat or a super sticker to help support the channel. I mean, come on. These are great messages. I really do like that. Trav says, I just ordered my new tank today, a Nuvo Fusion 25-gallon Lagoon. It's a huge upgrade for my 12. That means you have twice as much space to fill it up with corals. Congratulations. That'll be awesome. Let us know how you like that tank. Be sure you share pictures in Club Milo's Reef. I want to see this. Show us your old tank and show us your new tank. If you aren't a member of Club Milo's Reef, that is a group we have on Facebook. It's facebook.com/groups/MeLovesReef. And that group has less than 10,000 people in it. And we're a bunch of really nice people. We don't have trolls in there. We don't have mean people in there. We are not aggressive. We are helpful, friendly. It's just a really good environment. I set it up, nearly 5 years ago? Nearly 5 years ago? And the group has just been really, really good. I love it. I created a set of rules back when I started the group. I made this video. Because, whenever you go into a group on Facebook, there's always a list of rules. You have to agree to them. And I was like, I don't want a list of rules. I don't want a thing you have to read. I'm a video guy. Which is ironic, because now I'm doing a magazine. It's all about reading. But at the time, I said, I'm going to make the rules video, because these are going to be YouTube people that are in the group, and, they're used to videos. So I made this video, and I covered all the things I thought could possibly go wrong in the group. And I got to tell you, I am constantly impressed that my rules video is still 100% covered everything. I didn't leave anything out. It covers every possible scenario. We've had no issues. There's no regrets or I wish I'd mentioned this or I could leave this off now. No, it's like the perfect 10 commandments. It's so good. And I just put together a list that I wanted to live by, and I hoped you guys would too. And it's gone over really, really well. So if you're not a member, come join. I approve each person individually. It is manually done. I've approved all 9,500 people one by one over the years. And we get to share our tanks in there. We get to ask questions and share ideas. And sometimes somebody 3D prints something neat. And so it's a really cool group to be in. And it's free. By the way, we did have to throw out a couple of people. And one guy decided to be aggressive to another member, but he didn't even do it in the group. He did it in private chat. But the person contacted said, hey, Mark, I'm getting attacked by this person. What the heck? And he showed me screenshots like, yeah, he's got to go. So I threw him out of the group because he's not a good person. That's it. It's real simple. The group is there and and the rules are there. So, I mean, if you're going to be a jerk, then go in another group. Be in a group that likes jerks, So anyway, I removed him from the group, and he wrote a bad review for Milo's Reef, my company. And I was like, you didn't buy anything? You're not a customer, and yet you write a bad review? And I'm like, okay, that makes zero sense. So, can't please everyone, but I really, really try hard. Ian, I hope that's how you say your name, because sometimes it's Ian, says, at what point do you decide to restart a reef tank? Between Aptasia, bubble algae, high nitrates, not sure where to start. Well, if it's all those things, maybe a restart is the right idea. How much time do you have? How much money do you have? When you're trying to tackle a situation, you could say, okay, I'm going to deal with nitrate, and I'm going to get that under control. And you can. You can fix that one rapidly with water changes. You can change 50% of the tank 3, 4, 5 times in a row, like in a rapid succession. in a 10-day period. Just like every other day, change 50% of the water. And if you did that, your nitrates will come way down. You would then also want to really clean your sand bed during the process of these water changes to suck out all the nutrients that are I want to say embedded. It's just a nutrient sink in the sand bed because over time the sand traps a lot of organics, and there's worms and stuff down in there that are going to consume organics, and then they're going to poop into the sand bed. So there's additional waste. I mean, it's a whole thing. So as you're doing your water changes, you want to definitely be sucking out the detritus from the sand bed to get it clean. And between the water changes and the cleaner sand bed, you will actually get the nitrates in a nice low level. So that could be one thing. Then the bubble algae, you could put in an army of emerald crabs. And the third thing you mentioned was Aptasia. Well, I don't know what size aquarium you have, but there are certain fish that can eat them. You could use F-Aptasia, which comes in a bottle, and I sell it. And it works really, really well to get rid of them. And you could do other things like laser them off. You could scrape them off. You could, there's a lot of different methods. But, that's 3 plagues that you're dealing with, and they all can be addressed. But if you're like, look, I just want to start fresh, you could do that. You could take your rock out. You could take the rock and soak it in stuff like bleach or muriatic acid. And then, of course, you have to rinse it super well to get it where it's safe to use, and then move it back into your aquarium and get things reestablished and start all over again. You can do that. That is an option. It really comes down to how bad the plague is. There was a guy that complained. His name was Hop. I think he lived in Denver. He was a friend of mine for a super long time. And he had a complaint that vermitids were a pain in the butt. And I was like, yeah, I mean, how bad are they? And he was like, no, you don't understand. They're really bad. And I'm like, well, I mean, you can break off the tubes. You can put in bumblebee snails. You can put in emerald crabs. And he was like, Mark, I have tens of thousands of them. And I was like, come on, let's see this. And then he sent some pictures, or he posted them. And it was like every inch of rock was covered in tubes. I mean, it was like, wow. It was unbelievable. He literally had all the vermitids of the planet in his aquarium. So clearly, whatever he was feeding the tank was the perfect diet, and it helped them proliferate at a exponential level that just inundated the entire system to where he had to buy all new rock and get rid of the rock. And when I say get rid of, again, if you were to take it and soak it in acid and then put it in salt water and let it ferment, so to speak, in a barrel for a few months, it could be used again without vermitids because now they're all burned off. But it's that one there, it was not something it did require a restart, is what I'm trying to say. Mark says, what is a Vortec cradle for your shop? How do you use it? So the Vortec MP60 is a large motor that sits on the outside of the aquarium, and then on the inside is what's called the wet side that has the propeller that moves the water in the tank. Well, Ecotech sells these little sticky pads. They're square, and you glue them to the aquarium, and then you take the cable that's coming up from the motor, and you put it over the sticky pad and take a zip tie and lock it on. The problem is those sticky pads never hold. They just don't hold. It doesn't matter if you clean the glass with rubbing alcohol first, to get rid of all the impurities, and then put the sticky pad on. It's just the double stick white tape on those pads it's just garbage. So you could get better tape and put that on the pad in the first place and hope it holds. It still doesn't. So what I did was I came up with something called the Vortec Cradle. It cradles the motor. I get this ridiculously sticky tape from Amazon, and I apply it to the cradle. And then when you receive it, you would peel that off, that protective film like you do with double stick tape, and you would clean your tank extra well before you do this, and then you place it directly around the Vortec as professionally straight as possible, and you press on it really good, and it bonds to the tank. And then whenever you need to take the wet side off, the motor sits in the cradle and doesn't budge. It's awesome. I came up with this idea a couple years ago, and it works so well for the MP60. I've had a lot of people ask me to make them for the MP40, but I just don't think I can, because the plastic piece that I would have to make would be so fine, so delicate, so small to be that look, that I think it'll just, be chewed up on the CNC machine. If I owned a laser to cut out these pieces, I could probably make it. And then, again, use the magic tape. Now, I've sold lots of them. And I had one person say, "Hey, Mark, mine came off the tank. Why is that?" And I was like, "How is that even possible? They do not come off." And he said, "Well, then I'm your first." And I said, "Did you clean the glass?" And he goes, "Well, I took a towel and I rubbed it." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm sorry, that's not how I operate. When I'm going to glue something somewhere, I prep the area. When I'm gluing it once and done. I'm never going to do this again. It's just this. Back in the day, I worked in construction. I built houses for a while, and for a couple of summers. And I remember whenever they told me, you need to build this, or you have to nail that, I'd nail the crap out of it. I would put so many nails in it, that was never moving. If a hurricane came, everything left but what I built. I mean, seriously, it was ridiculous. I burned through so many nails, and I had zero regrets because I wanted it to last. I wanted quality. So I remember there was this thing that we were making. I believe it was called a hip. I'm not sure if it's hip gable. That's probably wrong. Hip joist. Maybe that's what it is. So basically, when you have a square house, you've got the ridge board, the top piece, and then you've got these joists that come out at an angle to the corners of the house. That's the hip. And we needed a super long board, which was longer than what came from the lumberyard. So basically, someone that's smarter than I am did a lot of math and came up with these two boards. You take one board and you cut a super long diagonal slice so it looks like a long point, almost like a weird looking toothpick, right? And then you do another one that matches it, and you bring the two weird crisscrosses against each other, and then you nail it like crazy. You put boards on both sides and you nail it some more. So I nailed the crap out of it. I put in so many nails. This hip joint is going to hold forever, right? And then my boss from up in the rafters says, "Hey, that's the wrong size. That's not going to fit. We need it to be longer." And I was just like, "I already nailed it." And he said, "Well, tear it apart because we got to redo it. And we're going to need, the first part. And then we'll put a longer piece on the second part and you'll rebuild it." So I'm down there pulling nails and it's taking me forever because there's so many. And my boss is like, "What is taking you so long?" I was like, "I built it. That's why it's taking so long. You're asking me to take apart something that was never going to come apart ever again." So he sent a second person to help me. And that person was a woman. And she said, "Holy crap, you've got to see this." Because there were so many nails in it. And so we're both, using pry bars and not pry bars. God, I don't remember the name of these tools anymore. I had a framing hammer, and then I had this tool that you use to remove the nails. It was like a nail pulling pry bar or crowbar or something. I don't know. And so both of us are hammering on that and popping nails and hammering on the next one and popping nails. And he's like, "What is taking the two of you so long? We need to get this done." And she's like, "You won't believe how he nailed it." So anyway, my point is, when I build something, I want it to last. So when I glue something, I want it to last. It's just how I'm wired. And when I glue something to the edge of a sump, like a long time ago, I had this cool idea. I'll make this acrylic bracket that's going to glue to the top edge of my sump. My sump is about 3 inches wide, so I had this flat surface area, and I would take this other piece of acrylic, set it on top, glue it in place, and there would be this hole in there, and drop the fan in, and it blows down on the water. And I glued it on there so it would not come loose and fall in, because I don't want the electric fan to fall into the tank and short out or cause electricity in the water. And I used my magic super duper wet application double stick tape, and it never came loose. So anyway, my point is, the Vortex cradle, if you prep the surface properly and you glue it on, nothing's gonna make it come off. But this person said his fell off. I was like, that's not even possible. So he said he just wiped it, which means he just kind of wiped around the salt creep that's on the glass. He did not use like Windex on the glass, or if it's acrylic, use vinegar and water, or use acetone, or use rubbing alcohol or anything to prep the area so that when you put the double stick tape product on there, it'll stay there for the rest of its life. And so I told him, "You've got to do that." And I sent him, more of something. Maybe another bracket. I can't remember what it was. But another person, he says, hey, Mark, where did you get that tape? And I was like, I got it from Amazon. And he's like, I need to get it because I put the cradle on the side of a 180-gallon tank and I can't get the bracket off. He says, I was pulling with all my strength and the entire tank was moving. I was like, that's what I like to hear. That's awesome. I wish you had video of this. So anyway, I know that the tape I'm using is 100% trustworthy and will keep your Vortec motor from falling off the side of the tank. So that is the short answer for your question. And then Photography in Flight sent a super chat, and he said, congrats on the award. Your dedication and willingness to help us out is much appreciated. Thank you, sir. Aw, I thank you for thanking me. That was really nice. I appreciate it. And the $5 too. That's great. Hello, Spinderella. Okay. Kumar says, if you had to pick only 4 corals for a huge tank, fill it all up with just 4 corals, exactly 4 corals, not 10 species of acro, and counting it as 1, just 4, what would it be? Psh, man, I don't even know. Okay, I got it. Recordia, Zoanthid, Frammer, Gorgonian. That would be the 4. And that would be an amazing tank as it filled in. If you're not patient enough, you could forego the Frammer and you could put in a toadstool leather. Now, basically what I've described to you is a softy-driven tank because everything I said does a softy. But Recordia, when it grows and completely fills the entire bottom of the aquarium, so it looks like a blanket of colors, it is absolutely amazing. And when I first saw Recordia, I was reading some thread on Reef Central. This guy posted a picture of his tank, and I didn't even know what I was looking at. I couldn't even comprehend the beauty. And I was like, what are those? And he says, they're Recordia. I'm like, where did they start and where did they stop? Because he had a continuous, colorful blanket, like Taste the Rainbow, like every color you could imagine. Just completely. There was no bottom of the tank. It was Recordia on the bottom. No sand, nothing, just Recordia. And it just rippled continuously, wall to wall, everywhere. And then I remember seeing another guy's tank where he had zoanthids, and he had lots and lots of colors. He was a big collector. And he had he had filled up, I don't know, it was like a 20-gallon aquarium. And it was just sitting off to the side because he had a reef tank. But this aquarium was just like a billion zoanthids, which I was really impressed with. I used to be really good at growing zoanthids. I'm not. That used to be one of my superpowers, and I could have lots and lots of giant colonies of them. And I kind of do miss that. I don't know what I'm doing differently or what I did back then that allowed them to grow so well. But, I just have some, and it's nothing impressive. But when you get all those different colors, it's just a beautiful field of flowers. I really like that. And then, like I said, a toadstool leather can be a centerpiece coral. It can be absolutely stunning and be that wonderful one. But a Frammer can grow into a giant colony. Frammer is a combination of frog spawn and hammer. It's some kind of a weird, it's not a hybrid, but it's just like a combination of both looks in their tentacles. And it really, really is a beautiful thing. And you could have one ginormous one growing. And there is a tank somewhere, I think it's in Colorado somewhere, where it's just like one giant, only hammer aquarium. And it's been going forever. And it's like 4 feet across of just one humongous hammer colony, which is really, really neat. And you don't see that very often. There was a guy that did a really cool cube tank that was very species specific, and he wanted that minimalist look, and so I think it's still within your 4 coral request. It was the Staghorn Forest. I think you can Google it, and it was just these 3 or 4 different colorful staghorn acropora, just like antlers from a deer, right? It was just really, really pretty. And the entire bottom, I think it was even a bare bottom tank, didn't even have sand. And so all you saw were these branches. It was really just like a crown. It was really nice. I see my hands. I keep doing the same thing over and over. It was really, really impressive. Aquaball says, can you tell us a little bit about coral quarantine? Well, sure. If you set up any kind of a quarantine tank, the idea is that it should be able to handle livestock. So what I do when it comes to coral quarantine, I want an acrylic box, usually not a glass one, because I just make what I need. And then I would put some live rock in there forever. This is the natural filtration for that aquarium for the rest of its life. I would put a light on top. I would put a power head in there for flow. I would stick in at the very least, a glass thermometer just to double check the temperature. And ideally, you should really set it up with a top-off system just to handle evaporation so you don't have to keep remembering to pour water in. Then anytime you get a coral, you just put it in that coral quarantine tank and you just leave it. And you can leave it there for observation. You could target feed it if you wanted to. You could, remove it to dip it in something, because you're trying to kill off specific pests or scrape it or frag it or whatever you want to do. But it's like your holding place. It's like the waiting room at the doctor's office. And I did that for the longest time. I had a coral quarantine tank running for years. And all I did was, I'd pour water into it from time to time because I wasn't using it, but I kept it operational. I just let it run, and I always had the live rock for my base filtration. And occasionally I would change water from it. I would drain water out because it was up high on a rack. So I would drain water from that to get rid of it, and I would drain water from the reef tank into it to refill it with some fresher water. And then back then, we had big problems with red bugs, with a lot of people had red bugs. And so I would be using Interceptor in that small tank. And I would just throw in the product in there. I'd mix it up in a cup of water and pour it into the coral quarantine tank. And that way I never had to worry about having red bugs come into my reef. And it worked forever. So that's it. It's not complicated. It doesn't need like a cycle because you're not putting fish in there. It's your coral quarantine. Now, someone recently asked me, I think in Club Milo's Reef, if I have a coral quarantine and I've had some corals in there for 3 weeks, and then I get a new one today and I add it, does that reset the clock? And I would say absolutely, because you just changed the entire dynamic. You had these corals in there for 3 weeks for whatever reason you're doing it. I don't even know why. But let's say you want to really watch them for 21 days straight, and then you put some new thing in there that could have God knows what crawling all over it. That could migrate immediately to the other stuff, and now you've got to observe all of them again. So if you were bringing in something new, it might be time to pull out what's in quarantine and get it in the tank. Because after 3 weeks, you should really know if it's okay or not. But, we all have different thresholds of how long you want to observe something. Some people are going to be way more patient, and they'd wait 45 days before they move it into their tank. Maybe it depends what you're looking for. What is it on the coral that you are fearful of? And let me digress into something else that happened this week that bothered me. Because I see this a lot, and it's problematic for the livestock. When you buy something from the fish store, or you buy it online and you receive it, you may see something on there you don't expect. And the natural inclination is to take a picture or a video, stick it on Facebook, ask everyone, hey, what is this thing? And then you react accordingly based on the advice given to you by a handful of strangers. And if you are not going to a trusted source, to someone that can verify and give you accurate information, there's a chance you're going to make a big mistake and throw away something of value. So in this case, the person bought a large hermit crab, and I think this was probably in the decorator crab family because it had a large anemone attached to the shell of the hermit crab, and it's one of those pink ones that are basically a symbiotic animal that they put on their shell. Literally, the hermit put it on its shell as a protective measure to keep it from being eaten, and it may put 2 or 3 on its shell. So anyway, the person got this hermit crab and was like, what is this weird fleshy pink thing? I don't trust it. And everyone's like, Aptasia, Mahano. There was all these people with these opinions. And, I think it's sponge. I think it's this. I mean, and by the time I saw it, he had already said, I already scraped it off and threw it away. And it was weird. And it was stringy. And I was like, you killed it. There was literally nothing wrong with what was on the shell of that animal. So, my point is, I've already said it. Ask someone, not strangers. Ask someone you can trust. And then double check what they say with a Google search. And look at the thing that you're seeing on the screen and compare it to the thing in your aquarium before you decide to murder it. Because these animals are actually, well, they're finite. They're not a limitless supply. And, I told him, I said, you made a big mistake. I mean, you just did. And he was like, I feel terrible. I'm like, good. And I know that sounds really heartless, but it's even worse for the animal because it's gone now. It's been shredded. So that really bothered me. And, we want to know what the animal is. We want to identify it properly. Look, as I go through page after page of documentation for each issue of Coral Magazine, I am double and triple checking, and so are the other editors, that what we're publishing is accurate and correct. It sounds like the same word, but it's not. We want to absolutely make sure that what we're telling you in the magazine is something you can trust and that will give you straight, helpful knowledge. And so, why did I make the Critter ID section of my website so long ago? I actually had pictures of the things so you could look at all the photos and see if whatever's on this page matches what's in your tank to help you identify it. And I didn't use the Latin names, I used the common names because I wanted you to be able to easily figure out what the thing is, what people typically call it, and what's the solution, or if it's even something you need to solve, or is it totally fine to have in your tank and enjoy. And ultimately, that helped a lot of people. So, Creature ID continues to exist. Critter ID became Creature ID. And it's even built into the Reef Trace app where you can look at critters right there on or creatures right there on your phone and go through the list and compare. It's not a compendium of everything under the sun or everything in the ocean, but it's a lot of the stuff that, we've encountered over the years and that I personally encountered. Almost all the pictures are mine. There was a few that I got from other people because I just didn't have the item to take a picture of, and those people gave me permission to use their photo, which was very helpful. But I think people, hobbyists today, are way too scared of benthic life. They are just terrified of everything in their aquarium. I'm like, then why are you setting one up? I'd much rather you set up something else than an aquarium where everything you see you think is evil and dreaded and you need to destroy it. All the stuff came from the ocean. It's all living in there, and the ocean has taken care of itself for how long? So now we take some of these things and we put them in a glass box. Enjoy them. They're neat. Are there some things that are a pest? Yes. Are they all absolutely evil? Not necessarily. I remember there was a thing that came out of my rock work, and it was the neatest little thing. It was this white thread, and it had these little, oh man, how do I describe it? Like little appendages coming off the thread with a white ball on the tip. And it was a bunch of them, and more, and then more. And the thing was, the thread came out of the rock, like it went into a hole. And then it would come out farther, and you'd see more of those. And it would come out really far with lots of them. I was like, this thing is so cool. And back then, we didn't do video. So I took pictures, and I took the photos, and I somehow stuck them in Photoshop and made them into an animated GIF to make a video. Think of stop motion. I basically took stop motion photos and made them into motion and posted that on Reef Central in Ron Shemek's forum because he was our guy. He's a marine biologist, zoologist. I don't know. He's an expert. He's hands down. I just don't know what his titles are, but he's a doctor and he knows a lot. He knows a lot more than I'll ever know. And he said, "Oh, yeah, that is this thing, whatever it was." And he said, "And it stings corals. You need to remove it." And I was like, I don't want to remove it. I think it's cool. I like it. There's 2 of them in my tank, so what? And I enjoyed them for as long as they lived. And basically there was a worm that lived in the rock, and it would put out that thing. This is not a vermitid. It was putting out this thing like a fishing line, and it would kind of, move in the flow, so it kind of lean a little bit, and it kind of did this herky-jerky thing, which I don't really understand that part, because then you think it literally is fishing, like for a fish to bite on so he can reel it in, which would never work, because the hole was microscopic, the thread was very, very fine, very frail. I can't think of words today. But it could grab something from the water column, or maybe things just stuck to its little appendage and it reeled it in like a vermited worm would. But it was a really neat thing, and I was hoping as I'm talking that I would think of the name again. But just a really pretty little sea creature, and it didn't bother me a bit. And I've had other things in my tank that I find fascinating. I like sea squirts, I like tunicates. People are like, what is this? I scraped it off the rock and got rid of it. I was like, tunicates are so hard to keep alive, and you literally just murdered them because you don't know what they are. So I want people to appreciate more diversity in their tank and not keep it so crazy sterile and down to, I've got rock and I've got 7 zoanthids. That's just not a good tank. It's too minimalist. You need the biodiversity for a successful tank. Okay, I'm done ranting. Okay, so yeah, you were talking about your alkalinity and you're measuring it accurately. Are you measuring it at the same time of day? Like, is it always at like 8 o'clock in the morning when you measure? Or is it, haphazard, like I measured, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I measured once at midnight, I measured once in the morning, and so your numbers are changing? Because they are. Alkalinity goes up and down, and it's consumed regularly. And it's definitely consumed during the lighting period. So if you have higher alkalinity earlier in the day, your reef will then absorb it, utilize it, and it'll be lower in the evening because it used it up, which is why we want to dose early in the morning. Number one, it benefits the pH of the aquarium by buffering it up slightly, and it also gives the corals that day their alkalinity consumption. Now, my own tank had a problem recently. I mentioned it last week where my alkalinity really, really dropped like a rock, and I wasn't sure why because everything was full, and it turns out my CO2 tank was completely empty. And I was actually, stunned how rapidly my alkalinity just tanked. I mean, it went down so hard. It was measuring somewhere down as low as I don't even know. I mean, I was just so surprised. I just stopped what I was doing with the test kit and started mixing up soda ash to buffer it up. But I mean, I think it was like 5.5 or something, and it's normally 9, and it had really come down because my tank is so full of SPS right now that it can slurp up 2 DKH per day. So in 48 hours flat, it can just suck it all down to nothing. And so I buffered the crap out of it to bring it back up. I put in 6 tablespoons of soda ash into my tank through, mixing it up in water, letting it dissolve fully, trickling it into the tank to get that number back up. And then I got the CO2 tank refilled, got that hooked up, and got it operational. Everything's good again. But alkalinity is something that I have always felt way more concerned with than pH. And if your number's not quite high enough, you need to put a little bit more in. By the way, I talked earlier about measuring the effluent of the calcium reactor, but I didn't tell you that I also at one point wanted to find out how much alkalinity is in alkalinity solution when we make our own. When you take 2 cups of soda ash and you mix it with a gallon of water. So I mixed up a batch, I let it completely turn clear, now it's ready, and I took 1 sample of that and I put it in a beaker. I stuck it on the Smart Stir, which you guys know I love and I sell. You can buy one please. And I was putting in alkalinity drops from the ELOS test kit, and every drop is half a DKH. And when I was done, I think I did the test twice because I was so shocked, and I went through an entire test kit doing this testing, but it was like 78 or 80 DKH. That's how strong that stuff is. And I was like, okay. So now I know what the strength of effluent needs to be on a calcium reactor, and now I know how much the strength of a batch of alkalinity is once it's been mixed up. Because I think a lot of us don't really think about that number. You get the recipe, you mix it up, and then you go to some reef chemistry calculator that tells you, or it asks you the questions. How many gallons are in your tank? What is the current alkalinity level? What is the desired alkalinity level? And then it says calculate. And then you do, and then it says you need 122 milliliters of this alkalinity solution to raise it up to where it needs to be. But then there's probably a warning that says, please only raise this much per every 24-hour period. So then you're like, okay, I need to put in 122 milliliters of this liquid, but I'm being warned to be careful. So I'm going to put in 40 today. I'll put in 40 tomorrow. I'm going to put 40 on the third day. And then on the fourth day, I'll test again, and we'll see if my number is kind of closer to where I hoped it to be. And that is a very good approach to correcting something in a tank if you're trying to be cautious. Myself, with all the experience I have, I am the Aquarist of the Year. With all the experience I have, I don't usually follow the cautiousness to a multi-day prong. I'm more about do some now, wait a few hours, and then double check, and then do some more. So like, for example, if I was trying to raise the alkalinity in a big batch of salt water, like my vat that holds 250 gallons, and I use the calculator and it says you need 3 tablespoons of soda ash, I'm like, okay, that seems like a lot. So I will mix up 3 solo cups with a tablespoon each, and then I put in 1 cup worth, and I wait 20 minutes and I check the number. And if it only came up a little bit, I'm like, all right. So then I put in cup number 2, and then I wait 20, 30 minutes, and I check the alkalinity. I'm like, all right, it's not quite there. The calculator was correct, and I pour in the third one, and then I wait about 30 minutes, and I double check it, and it's right there. I'm like, okay, good, it is. Now, I could have gone a little quicker and put them all in if I just believed it verbatim, but every once in a while, there's something where I'm just like, is that calculation really correct? And so I can go at it in stages and be a little bit more cautious. But I tend to do things at a more accelerated rate than I'll recommend to you, only because I want your tank to be safe, and I want you to be able to make these changes with some confidence that the advice you're being given is trustworthy. Wow. John says, I'm getting ready to set up a 742-gallon fish-only aquarium with dry rock and live sand. I would also like to grow coralline algae. What is the best way to cycle this new tank? Okay, well, it's like cycling any tank. It's a big tank, so you're going to need a lot of whatever you're going to use to start the cycle. There are products from Fritz you can use, like Turbo Start, and you might need like the big bottle. I don't remember how much the big bottle treats, but I just picture in my brain Sean would be going blah, 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 and just pouring in a whole bunch into the tank to get the cycle started. If I was starting with something more natural, it would be raw shrimp. But 750 gallons, that's monstrous. I mean, that is nearly double my reef tank. And when I started my frag tank, that was only 60 gallons, I put in 1 big, huge raw shrimp from the supermarket. Not a cooked shrimp, a raw shrimp. Like, give me that thing, the head, the tail, the whole animal. I want 1 shrimp. And it cost me $1. I came home, I just put it in the tank, I let it rot for 3 days, and I removed it, the carcass, it was disgusting, threw it away, and the tank cycle had started. For 742 gallons, you might need to drop in a lobster. I'm kidding, of course. No, I think a chemical would be the best way. Whether you're using pure ammonia or you're using the Fritz product, I think that would work to get you established to start off. You said dry rock. To be honest, I would probably get that rock immediately into barrels of salt water now with circulation. And I'll give you a little snippet from the upcoming issue of Coral we're working on right now. There's a section in there talking about using dry rock that's never been used before and using CO2, adding CO2 to the water where the rock is to help expel the trapped phosphate in the rock. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never done that. My method has always been to cook rock, and I really am a fan of cooking live rock. I'm not a big dry rock user. I've used some occasionally, but it is not my go-to. My go-to is live rock. You're using dry rock. That is not live rock. Getting it wet and putting bacteria on it does not make it live rock. It will not be live rock for probably a solid year in your aquarium full of fish. So, getting that rock into some water immediately and circulation, you could pour in bottles of bacteria. You could use things like Live Rock Enhance. That's a product I sell, and you could put that in there. It's real easy to use to establish some bacteria on the rock while it's pending being used in your aquarium. There's other things you can use as well, and then you could change the water once a week or once every couple of weeks for the next month or two. And then finally, when your tank is getting set up, you can take all that semi-cured rock. I mean, it's not cured. It's just it's been sort of established, and you've removed some of the phosphate, and you get that in your new tank with the live sand you mentioned, which is good. I'm glad you're doing that. And then you're going to want to have good water parameters, and that's going to be alkaline, calcium, and magnesium at the right desired levels to encourage coralline growth. And if those numbers are in the right target range and your salinity and your temperature are good, coralline will grow. Now, if you can get your hands on some live rock that has coralline, you can put that in the tank to seed the tank. Who is it? I think it's Carib Sea. That's where my brain is going. There used to be a product, or is a product, called Purple Up, and you can pour that in the tank. It was a product that has limestone, iodine, and something else that slipped my mind right now. But it actually encourages the coralline growth in your aquarium. So you could pour that into the tank to help get the rocks to get some color. But you're still going to have the ugly phase, and it's going to take a while for all the rock to be covered. But, in a couple of years, it's going to look amazing, and I'm going to want to see this tank. So that's the advice I have for you on that. While you're cycling, when the tank has got water in it and it's got the live sand, and you've got all this rock in there, and it's just kind of going through its process with the ammonia levels rising and falling, and the nitrate rising and falling, and then finally, the nitrate appears and the ammonia and the nitrite are gone, then it's ready to introduce your fish. During that whole cycling process, do not turn on any lights on the tank. Just let it go through the cycle lightless. Because if you turn the lights on during that cycling period, you will end up growing nuisance algae, and you have nothing in the tank to eat it, and it's going to take hold, and you're going to have to deal with removing algae later, and it's going to be kind of discouraging. By the way, since the tank is so big and you are doing only fish, what fish are you getting? I'm very curious what the setup is going to be, because it sounds very interesting. Aquaball says, I have the Hydros controller and I just bought the dosing pump. I did the same thing. I mean, I've got the Hydros on this tank and on Caitlin's Reef, and I ordered 2 of the dosing pumps, the Minnow. Maybe I ordered one. I think I ordered one because I want to see how it works. I also ordered the Soul to be my feed pump for the calcium reactor. So I'm just waiting for the box to arrive. I can't wait. Sully says, how's the 400 gallon doing? Well, that is the easiest question ever. It's actually doing quite well. It's full. If only I could figure out how to make this live stream software talk to my phone like it used to. It used to just find it and make it a secondary camera. I would just walk it over there and show you guys, but I'll just grab some video and stick it up on this channel later. The tank is full, and needs me to go in there and really harvest, really cull it, because it's just packed. And but it's great. I mean, the fish are swimming around. I feed them every day, and I refill my top off once a week. I deal with the turf scrubber when I can get to it, which is a problem because it's making my nitrates go too high because I don't clean it properly, because I can't get to it, because I don't have the anemone cube running, because I haven't got to it, because it's on my hit list, which I mentioned at the beginning of the show. But no, it's doing good. So I do share some pictures from time to time on my Instagram and Facebook feeds. If you're following me there, you would see it pop up there as well. But I'll try to get something up here on YouTube ASAP, because it's time. I got to give you guys a tour of all the tanks or something, which means all the tanks need to look good. That's always a challenge. Hey, John, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. That's awesome. That's almost a ball of Crown Royal right there. Thank you, Fabricio. That was really nice of you. He says, congratulations. I'm looking for the next question. Reef Keeper is commenting in the live chat saying that when he had velvet in his tank, he said, when I had it, I saved 14 out of 22 fish. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this because it sucks. Yeah, velvet is no fun. It is a real problem. And being able to resolve it as quickly as possible, or get the fish out of the tank and into treatment, is the only way. It destroys fish. I'm very lucky. I don't think I've personally dealt with velvet ever in my history of keeping tanks. Fish Ventura says Vibrant absolutely works on bubble algae, and use the dose for a clean tank on the label. It has no effect on my acros. There's been a lot of negative publicity about Vibrant, the brand, and what was in the bottle, and I saw threats of lawsuits and stuff. It's not a product I would use, and I don't recommend it to others. Paul says, are you able to make the holders for the MP40s? Not yet. I'm glad you love the ones that are for your MP60s. Me too. I think they're awesome. He said, I had to use a jackhammer to move mine. Are you the guy that moved your entire aquarium when you tried to pull it free? Because I was talking about that earlier in the show. Luke says, how to deal with fluke in a reef tank? I don't know. Another fish disease question. I don't have the answer to that. I think you have to put some kind of a trap in the tank, to be honest. But I don't know the details. So I'm just going to say I don't know rather than try and spin a web of lies. But I will say, if you're buying fish, because as far as I know, flukes only suck on the side of fish. So if you're buying fish, you should always be observing your brand new fish from all sides to make sure they are fluke free. And it's another reason why a quarantine tank is so important, because if you get a new fish and you put it in the quarantine tank, you can observe it for days and weeks at a time. And if you see the flukes, you can treat in that tank, or even remove it into a hospital tank if you need to, and treat that fish for flukes. And it never got into your reef. So you don't have to answer your question, how do you deal with flukes in a reef tank? We don't want them in there in the first place. So that's a parasite that we want to eyeball, we want to see it, and we want to carefully remove it however that's done, and make sure that the fish is safe to put in your tank so you're not bringing in a plague. Okay, so Ian says that his tank is a 50 cube, and the Aptasia aren't too bad. They just keep coming back in the same spots. So use F-Aptasia. F-Aptasia is fantastic. I sell it. I say it. I sell it because I use it, and I love it because it works. I had 2 or maybe 3 Aptasia show up in Caitlin's reef, and I smothered each one with so much. I did a video about it. It's on this channel. And it's like a 3-minute video. It's really short. But I just covered it with F-Aptasia like I was putting a ton of frosting on a cupcake. And people are like, wow, you use way more than I do. I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I? I want that thing gone. And I just smothered it. And I waited probably an hour or an hour and 15 minutes before I could turn the pumps back on. If you turn the pumps on and that stuff starts blowing everywhere, turn the pumps off immediately, because you don't want it blowing through the water column like snow in a snow globe. You want it to harden and become this coating that seals the animal inside, and then the acid inside that product will then destroy the Aptasia. It also works in other things you're trying to remove, whether it's Mahanos or Bryopsis. I don't know. The person with the Bryopsis, you should try F-Aptasia on the Bryopsis and see if that solves that problem. Oh, here's something that Richard Ross does sometimes when he has an area with a patch of algae he can't solve. I know you said your tank's small. You said 15 gallons. I can't remember who said it. Chad? But he would take 2-part putty, and wearing gloves, you mix it up until it's all uniform in color, and then you would put that coral putty, that's used to affix a coral, make it hold in place, and you would cover the area of algae or the pest coral that was out of control, like hydroids or something, and he would just cover it, press the putty down on it and leave it there for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then when he finally peeled it off, it was gone. They were dead. So you might be able to do that, but the problem is using a lot of putty in a small body of water can affect the water chemistry chemically, and it can make bad things happen with fish and corals and invertebrates. So you would have to be judicious. But maybe you could make a small patch of putty and do one area and see how that goes. And then, after a period of 5 to 7 days, make another patch of putty and do the next area. And then, another 5 to 7 days. See, now the chemical from the first putty It's not in the water column for 7 days. It's in the water column for the first 12 hours or so, basically. Probably. I'm just guessing. But it's in there for a while, and if you have a little protein skimmer, it's helping remove it. If you're running carbon, it's helping remove it. If you're doing a water change, you're helping remove it, But then you could do it in small sections, and you might be able to smother and kind of blanket over that bropsis and kill it off that way. Maybe. That might work. I just don't want you to use too much and hurt your livestock. So I do it in pieces. Oh, back to Ian's question or his comment. He said, I got the 50 ounce, the Aptasia aren't too bad. He says, I've tried emeralds and peppermints, but they end up picking on the corals. I like the crabs, but they always act up. That is true. That does happen. And, it can be frustrating. You're trying to feed a coral, and then the crabs come steal the food right off the coral. It's even worse when you're trying to feed a very slow-eating coral, like a Welsophilia, which I think has been renamed, or a Fungia, or some other meaty coral that takes like 45 minutes to open its tentacles and then slowly close down over krill or whatever food you're putting. And I've done it where I've watched the coral eat all the food and it's in the mouth. Like, okay, it's good. I can turn on the flow. And I just watch my peppermint shrimp run right over and reach in with its little claw down into the mouth and pull the food out. I'm like, are you kidding me? Did that coral get enough of that taste to survive, you stupid shrimp? And I would even give the shrimp a krill. Like, here's one for you, here's one for the coral. And the shrimp would say, thanks, and then he'd throw it aside and come steal. I'm like, ugh. So I totally get that. But yeah, emerald crabs and peppermints are ideal choices for picking at Aptasia and Valonia, but sometimes you're just going to have to do it manually yourself. TC Ho says, do you suggest a dip bath for cleanup crew like snails, hermit crabs, before putting them in the tank to avoid ick? No, I've never done that with any of my cleanup crews, and I have bought thousands over the years that are in all my tanks. At the very most, they get rinsed in new water, because it just depends how they're shipped to me and how they're received. Because some are shipped semi-dry, basically. It's just a bag of air with a bunch of hermit crabs. And then, you would run tank water over them to rinse the ammonia off their shells, and then you just put them in the tank. If it was snails, it might be very little water, it might be wet paper towel, or it may be a bag of water. So whatever it is, usually it's a rinse scenario, but never a quarantine. I've never done that, and I've never done a dip, because the chemicals in the dips tend to kill things like cleanup crew. It's not good for the snails, not good for the hermits. I mean, the whole point of dip is to get rid of parasites. Now, ick should not be present on any cleanup crew, because cleanup crew is never sold in a fish system. Cleanup crew is always kept in a big giant tank full of snails, a big tank full of emeralds, a big tank full of peppermint shrimp, a big tank full of cerus, a big tank full of nerites, a big tank full of conchs, a big tank full, and they never have fish. It's always a fishless system, so there should not be any ick present in those systems. So your stuff should be safe to put in the tank. If you want to, do the tank transfer method where you put them in a body of water and then you move them to another body of water and then another body of water, you could do that. But I've never done it. I just put them in my tank, and I've not had anything come from cleanup crew. Oh no! Fish Venturis, thank you first of all for the super chat. He said, I'm glad I took 2 coral magazines on this trip this week. I got stranded overnight in Chicago. That's the worst. Man, I am so mad at travel. My last trip, I went to Reef Stock, and then, I got there on time. It was fine. It's just the necessary evil of getting somewhere, right? You can either drive there, which takes forever, or you can take a plane. But coming home, I got to the airport on time, I did all the things I'm supposed to do, and the airline did not. And I ended up waiting 4 hours at the airport for my flight, which is a long time when you're thinking you're boarding in, 40, 50 minutes? And, I hung out at the bar, I tried, looking at the snack stands for snacks, I looked at food in the restaurant because, I'm here for dinner time, and everything was super pricey, and you don't have any options, you just have to pay top dollar. They've got the captive audience, right? But having Coral Magazine with you was brilliant. Everyone should have Coral Magazine in their bag when they travel. I just wish the airlines were on time. I just feel like it's 2024. You have been doing this airline thing for 50 years, right? By now, it should be a science. Other than something breaks. Or sometimes there's a weather thing. I mean, I get those things happen, but man, it seems like lately, people are just being stranded on the regular. And I will say this. Boy, I'm in rant mode today. I do not like that the airlines are overselling the seats on the plane. And I don't even understand how that's even remotely legal. Here's my brain's thinking of it, and I've not done the homework. And I should, because maybe it'll calm me down. If you have an airplane that can hold 300 passengers, and you sell 300 seats, you've made the money for the flight. It covered everything. It covered the baggage handlers. It covered the pilot. I mean, you've sold 300 seats. You didn't sell 100 and you're struggling to survive. Which, by the way, that's what's happening with companies right now. Not enough people have money and they don't have enough money to buy things. And companies are struggling because they're not selling as much as they used to. But airlines, if the plane is full, you can't sell any more tickets. There's none to sell. So for them to say, we oversold this by 30 people, I'm like, how? How do you have 330 people for a 300-person flight? And ultimately, the excuse might be, well, what if some don't show up? The seat was paid for. They paid for it. They didn't show up. That's their fault. You should not be able to oversell a flight. You should not be able to oversell a theater. You should not be able to oversell anything. It should be, you have this much, and you sold them, and they're gone. That's it. Lucifer says, I'm sure that's what that says, said, where did you get the live rock with that thing in it? Oh, the rock that I got back then, that I was talking about the little worm thing, probably from the fish store. Because I was buying live rock at the store, and it was $8 a pound. And I would go through their vat, and I'd look for things. And then, of course, I would get some rock. I got some live rock from Fiji once, which was really cool. I got live rock from other people's aquariums sometimes when I was buying things from them. Because, I bought a 55-gallon, a full setup, it came with rock. And then I bought a 280-gallon. Now that was a bummer. So here's a story for you guys. Way back in 2004, there was a guy in our club. His name was Gary, and he says, hey, Mark, I'm looking for a big tank. And he's like, can you help me find one? I was like, sure. And then I, stumbled on a 280-gallon tank that was up for sale. I said, Gary, I found you the tank. And he said, cool. So I put him in contact with the seller, and he went to look at it. He loved it. He said, done. I'm buying it. And I don't know. No money changed hands, but he was committed to it, right? That's all I remember. So anyway, within 7 days, Gary calls me up and goes, Mark, and it was like 1 a.m, and he's like, Mark, it's too much tank. It's too big. I can't take it. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, it's too big. I can't do it. I'm like, it's 6 feet. It's not that big. And he's like, nope. Can you just make me a list of all the things so I can put it up on DFW Mass, our club's website, to sell it? And I was like, you're going to sell the tank you just bought that you don't want to set up when you told me you wanted a bigger tank? And he was like, yeah, I think that's the best thing all around. I told the guy I'm buying it. And so, if you'll help me make this list, I'll do something. I'll give you the calcium reactor or something, And I was like, okay, that sounds good. So I said, you know what? Before, I said, let me make the list, but don't say anything yet. And then I came back to him and said, okay, here's a list of everything. It's a lot of stuff. I said, but you know what? I don't want you to post this. I want you to give me 24 hours to decide if I want to buy it. And he's like, oh? I said, yeah. I said, I think I might be interested. And he was like, okay. And so then I was in my living room and I was just thinking, do I want to make the house payment or do I want to buy a big tank? I said, I can always find more money for a house payment, but a 280-gallon reef, that sounds awesome. I'm going to buy it. So I called up Gary and said, okay, I'm buying the tank. He goes, well, okay. So the price was $2,500, but I sold all the live rock. I'm like, you don't even have the tank. How did you sell the live rock? And he was like, well, things are happening. And he's like, I'll make the price, I'll lower the price, and I'll give you that calcium reactor. And I was like, okay. So I can't remember what it was. Maybe I paid $1,500 or something. Maybe $1,800. I don't know. But I got this huge tank with no live rock. And I was like, what am I going to do? I have rock from the 55 gallon and the 29 gallon, and I've got a barrel full of live rock that I'm cooking. Is that going to be enough? And that's what ended up happening. And then, of course, over time, I was like, I need 2 or 3 more rocks. And I go down to Frank's Tanks and I buy another rock or 2. And then I was like, here's a spot. I need another rock, And then later, as I told you earlier in this live stream, a guy, his name was Nathan, he says, I need you to hold some of my corals and I'm going to give you some rock. And so I got some rock from him. So, with all these things that have happened over the years, that's how my rock ended up, I don't know exactly where it came from for that little thing. I'm going to find that thing. I got to tell you what it was called. I mean, we've been talking all this time and I've been dancing around it. And for some reason, it's just not coming up in my head. So we'll go to Creature ID and probably in the Worms section. There it is. Digitate Hydroid. So there's a horrific picture I took way back in the day. It probably used to be my animated GIF. But it was just this little thing. So anyway, it's there for you guys in the chat. So Ron Shemek says digitate hydroids are bad. And actually he says, typically they would be stinging around the base of a leather coral and irritate the coral and could possibly cause some necrosis. But in my tank, it was just kind of waving in the breeze and not touching anything, so I didn't care. Okay, let's go to another question. How are we doing on time? Oh, we've been going on this for a while. Let's see, something moved here. Oh, this moved a whole bunch. I lost my spot. I think Dale is asking me this question. Oh wait, I skipped another one. Where did I leave off? Gee. Okay, there's that. There's Lucifer. Hydroid. Yeah, digitate hydroid. Can you get the Coral magazine in the UK? Yes. It can be shipped to the UK is what I should say, and the subscription rate's a little bit higher because of the extended shipping. And I've been told that the shipping takes a long time, like a month longer than for us here in the US, maybe 6 weeks, maybe as much as 2 months. I've been told by a couple of people, not like a handful, just like 2 people have said, like when I get this issue, or actually, when I get the next issue, they receive this issue. It's that, just the slow postage is really slow going international. But it does get there. So you're just going to hear about the newer magazine sooner from me on this channel. Surf Zone Aquatics says, have you ever used a sulfur reactor to keep nitrate down? What do you think of them? I have not, and I'm intrigued, and I'm probably going to do it one day. That was an easy answer. I actually talked about it earlier in the live stream too, because someone else asked, have I considered doing one? And it's on my consideration list. Carol says, it's very disappointing that the pods didn't work in Caitlin's tank. I had high hopes. I added mine 3 days ago. What are you going to do now? Well, I am going to find out what this new thing is that's growing, because it looks completely different from the Ostreopsis I had. This stuff was more like a brown, golden honey brown gel-looking blob wrapped around some things in the tank, and I just siphoned it out. And I, siphoned out, a gallon of water, put in a gallon of water in to replace what I lost. I don't even know what this is. I think it's a different plague, and I don't think it's related to... I've heard this, that like you have Ostreopsis and you resolve it and then you get a different dinoflagellate. So it wasn't like I was not expecting it, but I thought I was just done with the problem. I don't think adding the pods was a bad decision, and they're still all over the glass. And I'm still putting Fido in that tank. But whatever this new thing is, I'm going to have to stick it under a microscope to find out what it is and if I have to do more or less or whatever. I don't know. But I am tired of that tank not looking great because I want it to look beautiful. Hey, Aquaball says, my favorite reefing channel on YouTube. Right here, he explains everything in detail with so much help. Thank you so very much. You're welcome. I'm laughing at my Fish Ventura saw my recommendation of starting a cycle with a lobster. Just a big dead lobster. Dark Lad says, do you still use the XHO kit add-on? Is it worth the money? Yeah, I still have both of my add-on kits. On my 400 gallon, I'm using XHOs now, but they will be replaced with a newer version that are twice as wide with a whole bunch of LEDs in them. And I'm looking forward to seeing how my tank looks under them as supplemental, additional extra bonus light besides my sky. And then on my Anemone Cube, what I have is the Gen 6 Radeon and the AI Prime light. No, Prime? Blade. The blades, I have those ready to go for that tank if I ever get my butt in gear and get that tank operational. But I might leapfrog from the blade straight into the newer XHOs. Are they worth the money? Yes. They're great. I like them a lot. Actually, I love them. Trav says, I'm going to use a 2-year-old sand and rock for my old tank and my new tank. Do you see any problems with that? Yes, I do. The rock's fine. You can totally do it. So I'm going to describe what you're going to need to do, and then you can choose what you want to do. But the rock itself, grab a big trash can and put it in front of a saltwater trash can, not trash. And this is where you maybe use the trash can for mixing salt water. Take your nice clean trash can, put it in front of the aquarium, drain some water out of the tank, I don't know, 6 inches worth or whatever, just enough to get the trash can about this deep in salt water, maybe a little bit deeper. Then take the rocks out of the tank one by one, and really, it'd be even, I don't know what size your tank is from the 2-year-old tank. I don't know what size it is, but I'm assuming you have lots of water to work with here, and if you don't, you can always mix up salt water and make more. But take the rock, put it in the trash can of salt water, and shake it really, really hard, back and forth. Just really churn up the water and shake all the detritus out of the rock. Then you could take it and put it in like a bucket of salt water and shake it again, and then in a third bucket of salt water and set it aside. And just do that one by one with the rocks as they're coming out of your tank, and that way you'll clean the rock of trapped detritus. It'll be nice and it'll be cleaner rock, but you don't lose the sponges, you don't lose the bacteria, you don't lose all the cool critters, and even some coral that's still attached to the rock will still be intact. Coral colonies like SPSs, you should break those off and set them aside in a temporary frag tank, or maybe a giant cooler that you can put salt water in and a power head and a heater and put the corals in there for now. But the rocks, you want to shake out all the crap out of them so that they're nice and cleanish. You don't have to scrub them, you don't have to brush them, you don't have to do anything like that. Just shake them off underwater, move them into more water, shake off again, and then put them underwater again and set them aside in a bin of salt water or something. The sand that's 2 years old, you need to clean it. And I would remove all the sand from the tank. I would then save 2, maybe 3 cups of sand, like a measuring cup, in a Ziploc bag and set that aside. You can even put that inside the vat that has the rock to keep it the right temperature, but it's sealed in a bag right now. And then go wash all that sand out in your driveway. Just grab a garden hose, fill up a bucket with sand about a third to half full. Usually a third is easier to work with. And take your garden hose and, if there's a nozzle on the end, set it to jet and just blast the sand and slosh it around super duper hard to get all the detritus to float upward. Because the sand will kind of rise and fall. It's going to do that because sand is heavy. The detritus, the waste, the decay, the organics, that'll all rise and float, and you can tilt the bucket over and pour out all the brown water, and you add more of the churning of the water, with the garden hose. You just keep blasting with the garden hose over and over, and we're washing out everything. When you're done, you're going to have washed sand that is completely bacteria-free, because it's not going to survive all that fresh water. And you're going to pour off all the water to where it's just damp sand. And you can put the damp sand in your new tank, and then you're going to add some water on top, and then you're going, just, an inch above it, just enough. Then you'll take your Ziploc bag of your live sand, your sand from what you saved, and you're going to pour that in the tank in one or two spots, and it could be like a hill. And then when you turn on the flow in the tank, when you've got more water in the tank and you got the rock in there and all that, the flow will disperse it and let all the bacteria and the worms and everything dissipate into the sand bed. And over the next month or 2 or 3 or 6, everything will migrate through to the entire sand bed, become live again. So that's what you need to do. And it's an arduous process. It's going to take a while. And I've even done it like with the 280 I talked about earlier that I bought. I ended up telling a guy, you're in charge of sand. And he was out there with 7 buckets of sand. And he was out in the driveway, and it was August. It was crazy hot. And he was out there cleaning all my sand. Then he'd bring me in 1 bucket at a time. And when the bucket was clean, I'd bring it in and I'd pour it in the tank. And he'd go out there and work on the next until he was done with all the sand, and we poured it all in the aquarium. But you don't want to just scoop the sand out of your 2-year-old tank and move it into your new one because it's more than 6 months old. As soon as it hits the 6-month threshold, you got to wash it. Because otherwise you're going to have all kinds of, it's going to be dirty, number 1. It could be semi-toxic, number 2. And so that's why we wash it out thoroughly. Now, the sand in the bag I talked about, if I'm doing this all in the same day, if you're going to keep it in that Ziploc for days, like if this is going to be a while, you probably need to leave the bag open. Yeah, you might need to pour some water from the rock vat into the bag, kind of refresh it, because we do want that live sand to stay oxygenated. We don't want it to die off because you're trying to keep it as seed for the dry sand, for the washed sand bed. I was going to say dry sand. And no, you do not need to put the sand through RO water when you're done with the tap water. Just use the tap water. The water will all run off. You'll have damp sand. You will not be moving any tap water in your tank. It's completely safe, and you will do fine. Michael Nunley says, when I used soda ash, I made it myself. I used 2 1/3 cups in 4 gallons of RODI water, and I'm dosing that 24/7. Okay. Why? What am I missing? I mean, I appreciate you sharing that with us. The number surprises me, though, because it's so much weaker than I expected, because you said it's in 4 gallons of water, not in 1 gallon of water. So I'd love to know more of what's going on here. Keep embellishing. Dale says, would you rather have vermitid snails or Aptasia? Neither? Is that a third choice? I mean, Aptasia are just small glass anemones, and I can get rid of them. So I'd say I'd rather have Aptasia because I can handle that. I can throw a copper band at it. I can throw Aptasia at it. I can scrape them off one by one if I want to. I've dealt with Aptasia in the past. It's a nothing. Thomas says that he switched his fish over to rod seaweed, and they're going crazy for it when he puts it on a veggie clip. Well, that's good. I would expect that. Andrea, that's the wrong link. You want F-Aptasia, not Aptasia RX. And Aquaball says, I got rid of hair algae with water changes and crabs. That's good. Crabs is a thing that a lot of people don't want to get. They just say, oh, hermit crabs are problematic. But I had this happen to me myself where I just kind of forgot that I need to get some hermits for my anemone cube. And so I had this hair algae thing going on in there, and I'd put in a bunch of snails, and I still had algae. And I went down to Frank's tanks and said, what's going on with my why do I have algae in my tank? Refresh my memory. And he says, do you have any hermits in there? I was like, I have no idea. And so I bought a handful of hermits, 10, and I dropped them in the tank. And I watched them go right up the rock, and they were just with their little pincers, were just cutting it off. It's like, look at them go. This is great. And I was glad he reminded me because I just kind of forgot. And then Reef Keeper is suggesting possibly using super glue on top of the Bryopsis, where we had talked about the putty earlier. And then, F-Aptasia probably would work as well. Hey, so John's telling me now about what fish is going in this giant tank. I wanted to get an emperor angelfish and was only going to build a 500 gallon, but after purchasing the 1.5 inch acrylic, I couldn't see cutting off 19 inches to make it a rimless. Oh, rimless? Do not make this a rimless tank out of acrylic. You are going to regret it. This has to have a top piece. So the tank, I mean, look, you could build it rimless, but then fill it up with water and just watch what happens. The whole center is going to bow outward significantly. You need a top piece, and you need to cut in a small series of openings in the top piece. It should be a really thick border around the entire tank with cross braces. I mean, if the tank is 8 feet long, like I'm thinking it is, you're going to need 4 openings in the top, and the openings are going to be smaller. So, like, let's say your tank was 30 inches wide. You need like 6 inches of acrylic at the front and at the back and on the end. So that means 612 out of 30 gives you 18-inch openings. So you might have like 18-inch square openings times 4 on an 8-foot tank. It's super important to have a top piece on an acrylic tank. Acrylic bows like crazy. I've seen a guy that had a 2-inch thick acrylic long tank. It was like 6 or 8 feet long, and it was 1 foot tall, and it was rimless. And he filled up with water, and then he took pictures and showed us, and the center bowed out a solid inch. And it was only 12 inches tall, and it was made of 2-inch acrylic. No, it was probably 1-inch acrylic. But it was just insane. It was unbelievable. And the reason I'm saying no to the 2-inch is because I have seen a tank that was 2 inches, but it was also short, like 10 inches tall. And that one was rimless, and it was beautiful, and it was made by MRC, and the store was phenomenal. It was just gorgeous. But very shallow waterbed systems can work with rimless, but glass stays true. Acrylic bows. It just does. It bows for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's plastic, so it's bendy. And secondarily, it absorbs water on the inside a little bit, a certain percentage, 1.5%, 15%, some number like that. So it's got a little bit of moisture in there on one side while it's dry on the outside, so it does the concave, convex thing. So you can't go rimless, especially on this ginormous aquarium. Please, please, please don't make that rimless. Now, the top piece doesn't have to be the same thickness as the front and back panels. You could potentially have a thinner top piece. So, like, if your tank is 1.25 thick, you said? Was that right? 1.5. You could probably use a 3/4 inch slab for the top. Fish Ventura reminds us that we can always use filefish for Aptasia. That's a good one. I've never had that fish, but you're right. I forgot about them. And then Lee and Mandy want to know, could you use nudibranchs to eat Aptasia? You can. And sometimes I've seen people where they take the Aptasia-infested rock and they put it in the tank, like in a separate quarantine tank, with the nudibranchs, and they just kind of swap the rocks out one by one, and that way they keep all the nudibranchs in one system where they don't lose track of them. I know there was a speaker many years ago talked about how you get the parents, the adult nudibranchs, and then they make babies, and the babies go off and eat the Aptasia, and you keep the parents making more and more, so you constantly have nudibranchs. And I was like, oh, that's pretty smart. I think I bought some once in my life and put them in the tank, and they just went away. I never saw them again. Fish Ventura says, my LFS mixes fish and inverts. That's crazy. I can't even believe it. I've not seen that, and I've been to lots of fish stores. Rather Be Traveling says, where do you buy your cleanup crew from? I used to buy them from Keys Critters, but they're gone, and I'm really sad. I've had good luck with reef cleaners. I was happy with them. So, I'm always buying so many at a time that I really want the best price I can get. And I've looked at some other options. Like, for example, saltwateraquarium.com was selling cleanup crews, and they were doing these packages where you could get this many for a 29 gallon and this many for a 55 and this many for a 75. I'm like, what about the 400 gallon tank, And it just was, it didn't match what I needed. So that's why I did reef cleaners. TC Host says, can you suggest where I can buy old coral magazines? Yes, you can. You can get them from coralmagazine.com. They're all listed on the website, and there's a ton of them. And they're happy to ship you back issues. I have some right behind me on my that you can see as well, so you can buy some from me. I actually need to put these as a list so I can show in case you're trying to find specific issues. But Coral Magazine has every magazine listed, and if they're in stock. So you can go straight to that website and look through the back issue section and choose what you want to get. Thank you for asking that question. The Zen Ginger, I haven't seen you in forever. She said, I made a live stream. Really late, but good to see you. Thomas says, is a pH of 7.8 okay? It is. It's okay. Randy Holmes Farley a long time ago made a comment, and I never forgot it. He said how some people have a tank that's 8.1 to 8.3 day after day. And others will have a reef tank that's 7.7 to 7.9 and everything's doing well. So ultimately, it always comes down to how is the livestock doing? If it's all doing well and it's continually growing and thriving, then, there's no reason to make any changes. As I look in this little tank here, and it was more interesting, but unfortunately, just as the night before I moved that tank, before I touched it, the elegance coral that was on the top that was so pretty let go, the polyp let go of the skeleton and blew off into the rockwork. Real bummer. And because it was a nice thing, so I'm trying to decide what to put in there next. I might put some Frammer there. I might put a leather in there. I don't know. I need to put something because right now it's just a pile of rock. But there's a bunch of rock anemones around the bottom, and there's hidden cup corals, and there's a bunch of different types of clams of all kinds in there. Not the kinds you're thinking of, the kinds that no one cares about. There's a bunch of filter feeder clams in there. And I'm enjoying that diversity of life. I like seeing things that are just doing their thing, but ultimately I do need to do something to dress it up, make it a little bit prettier to look at for the show, and for me. Ed says, I had quite a few Aptasia in my 90-gallon tank. I put 2 peppermint shrimp in, and they cleared up all the Aptasia in my tank, and I haven't seen one in 2 years. That is awesome. I hope you gave them a reward. They did a great job for you. Winderwater says, some soft coral or anemone appeared in my tank. It has white tips, and it's clear. Is it okay? Post a picture in Club Me Loves Reef, and I'll let you know. Pop Reef says, my new tank is my first acrylic tank. One big challenge is that it scratches. What suggestions do you have to get rid of it without emptying it out? And how do I best clean the acrylic without scratching it? Okay, so there are acrylic scratch removal kits you can buy, and you can use them underwater in the tank. Depending how bad the scratch is, going to require how much effort you have to do to knock it out. But basically, you're going to use different grades of sandpaper that are in the kit, and you will use the coarse one first to basically go this way across the scratch, and then you'll switch to the next grade, which will be less rough, and you're going to go this way. And then you go to that. So, like for example, let's say the roughest sandpaper, and usually it's not sandpaper, it's like emery cloth, it's sand cloth, and it goes around a sponge. But you could take this emery cloth sandpaper and wrap it around a cleaning magnet, for example, and go, and then you switch. So you could be using 400 grit, right? and then you go to 800 grit, and then the third phase would be 1200 grit, which is way finer, and then you go to 1800, and then you go to 2400, and then you go to 3000, and then you go to 5000, where it just looks like a piece of leather. It doesn't even have grit at all, and you're doing those final. It's a very tedious, slow process. It's not fun. The goal is don't scratch your tank, but scratches can be cautiously removed. If you have a big tank and it's way more work than you want to do, there is a company called Sea Clear that will require you to empty the tank completely, and they will climb in and they will make it brand new. That's one of the perks of an acrylic tank. You can have an old tank and make it look brand new again with a proper servicing, and then refill it and you have a brand new tank. It's really neat. And Sea Clear travels all over the nation fixing acrylic tanks, and he shares his videos on Facebook all the time. He shows up my feed on a regular basis. But now, how do you clean the tank without scratching it? That's the second question. So when you buy cleaning magnets, they have a coarse pad, but they sometimes include or offer as a separate add-on an acrylic safe pad that you would use instead of the default pad. And you need to make sure you're using acrylic safe on the inside and the outside, because both sides are acrylic, and we want to make sure we don't scratch the tank. When you're getting rid of something stubborn, don't use a blade. Use a credit card or a gift card or a hotel key card to scrape away that stubborn thing off the acrylic, and that way you avoid scratching it. As long as the scraper is softer than the acrylic, you will not scratch your tank. Yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, I know there's probably plenty more to delve into, but that should get you rolling here. Also, I will say this. When you're using your cleaning magnet, it's very important that you do not capture some grains of sand from the sand bed between the magnet, even with your acrylic safe scratching pad, because the grains of sand will... And also, all these things pop in my head, because this happened to me. I had an acrylic tank where you first walked into my front door, and one day I was using the cleaning magnet on the panel because it was, I wanted it to be pretty, and I accidentally... I was using the cleaning magnet, and there was an Astorina in my way, and I just thought I'd flick it to make the Astorina fall off and rain down into the reef where it belonged. But instead, it got stuck under or in the side of the cleaning magnet. I didn't notice as I kept going, and I was like, oh! And I could see like a zigzag Zorro scratch in my acrylic on the inside because the Astorina's body was so rough. It sanded a groove, a line, a scratch. I was really mad at myself. I was like, ugh, because I tried to use the magnet to flick it out of my way when I should have just removed it and then used my cleaning magnet like I was always so careful with. So I had to deal with trying to remove the scuff. The finer the scuff, the easier it comes off. The deeper the scratch, the more work it's going to be to fix it. Claudius suggests I make it a Ghani garden. I'm surprised no one spit out, you need torches! Because I know torches have been the rage for the last few years. Goniapore I've never had much luck with, but there's more knowledge about it. And in our last issue of Coral Magazine, not this one, Jason Langer was telling us about the things he does for his Ghanies. So I really do have kind of like a cheat sheet or a recipe for success I could mimic. Because there's certain things he was putting in the tank, certain elements that were really good for Ghanies besides lighting, flow, and water quality. Jason says, what do you suggest for sponges growing on sandbed? Is there a cleanup crew that deals with this? It only grows in low light and shadowy areas. Usually sponges don't grow on the sand. They grow on the underside of rocks and stuff. I'd love to see pictures of this, but I don't worry about sponges at all. The more sponges my tank has, the better. I think they're fascinating. They come in so many different textures, different shapes, different colors. There's a rock in Caitlin's Reef that is, being lit from above, right? And there's stuff growing on it. But the underside that I can't see, I am almost positive it's a huge sheet of blue sponge, which is really cool. And I need to flip the rock over and get a good look. But I was staring at it, I was like, is that blue? It's really cool. I think sponge is awesome, and sponge is number one. If you're growing sponge in your tank of any kind, that's a good indication of a healthy system. Now, you asked what eats it, what gets rid of it, and so I should answer your question. Angelfish love sponge, but I have a Coral Beauty in my 400-gallon, and the sponge is alive, and I've got the Japanese pygmy angelfish in Caitlin's reef, and it's not chewed on the orange sponge or this blue sponge or the white sponge or the I have some bivalves and tunicates. I mean, it's I think it only wants to destroy LPS corals at this point. So if you're putting angelfish in there, you can. If this is sponge, you can just reach in and tear out. You can do that without having to use a crew. But I would leave it. It's doing no harm. It never will do harm because it's a filter feeder. It's harmless. I would leave it. Lee and Mandy say, I'm just getting into SPS. Can you recommend some that do well in lower light tanks? I would say, yeah, it's an SPS. Bird's Nest is great for low light tanks. It grows abundantly. It grows fast, so it fills in nicely. It can die fast, but that being said, I've been growing Bird's Nest for a super long time, and it just stays with me. So, barring anything happening to it or anything happening to your water parameters, you have lots of different shapes and textures. There's like 5 or 6 different types of Bird's Nest. Some are rounded over, some are pointy and sharp. There's one that's hot pink. There's one that's kind of a green-blue metallic. There's one that's tan if you want to, mix up with your colors. There's one called Birds of Paradise. It's a little bit more colorful and the tips are rounded over. A lot of choices in that. And also, another one you could probably get away with would be... No, this might be bad advice. I was going to say, you lower light, less quite, Bird's Nest for sure, okay? Because you said low light. But normally with SPS corals, you're going to want to increase your lighting. You want better lighting. So I would start off with Bird's Nest to get your feet wet, see what you think. And then after a while, you might say, look, I want to upgrade my lights because I'd really like to get some Stylophora. I'd like to get some Pasillipora. I mean, Pasillipora is another one that could probably be okay in lower light. So Pasillipora and Bird's Nest are the two I'm going to recommend right now. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. All right. We've been talking for over 2 hours. Let us jump to this. Today is Water Test Saturday. Please do test your water parameters because it does more than just give you numbers. It saves lives. It's really important that you do this on a weekly basis for the long-term benefit or long-term survival of your livestock. Your fish and your corals rely on you for good water, and just looking at it isn't good enough. You got to use your test kits. They don't last forever, and they do expire. So it's better to use them up and know what's going on with your tank, because if any of the numbers are wrong, you can make adjustments now before the corals and the fish start struggling. And because if something goes wrong in your tank, it's going to take 12 weeks to get it restored. But if you avoid the problem by testing and knowing where your numbers are, you can be more proactive, and that way your tank will continue to look pretty and continue to grow, and you'll have something beautiful to stand around and look at when everyone comes over for Christmas. Because the holiday is nearly here. I should end this episode. I should have said this a long time ago. So only the people that stayed here to the very end. There are 3 events coming up where I'll be at here. October 19th, I'll be in Maine for the Reef Expo and Frag Swap. On November 1st, I will be in the Long Island Reef Club, Reef Association. I'll be speaking to their club meeting. And then on November 9th, the week later, I'll be at the Boston Reefer Society Fragsgiving 2024. And Richard Ross will be there, and a third person whose name I forgot. But so there's some opportunities to come see me in person if seeing me on YouTube is not enough. Anyway, anytime you can go to a local event of some kind, Frag Swab Club meeting, go do it. Support your local club, support your local fish stores, buy some stuff and help them stay open. The economy's terrible. We all need business. I need your business too, because we'll get out of the slump. Things will get better, but we're going to need to support each other to make it to the end. Guys, have a great weekend, and I will see you again next week. Bye.